So Zaarly is actually one of my favorite companies to watch as an analyst and to use as a kind of geek. They're doing some really interesting things that we're going to get into. Come on up. How you doing?
Hey, great. How are you?
Good. Please take a seat. So you guys have had a pretty interesting, history so far. You're what, 10 months old?
Yeah.
Something like that, right?
Yeah,
I think it was
nine or 10
It was like
months.
February, March, like right around South by Southwest last year,
right.
where you guys launched, and I think it was.
Yeah, we launched. We were 10 days old.
Actually,
when
before we
launched,
get into the history, I want to show you this. So this is right around that time when you guys launched. There was a TechCrunch article about the launch, and so I was one of 31 comments that I made, and I said, very good idea. One challenge will be, the classic chicken and egg scenario, and that's made worse when, content, what does it say, requests are spread even thinner when segmented geographically, a classic local problem. And then, I'll use it though. So, I'm glad to say that, 10 months later, you guys have done a very good job kind of contending with that chicken and egg challenge, and I think we'll get into that in a second. But I want to give you a chance to talk about the company's background, that 10 months you just had, the growth, some of the funding you've done. You just had Meg Whitman join your board.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about the company's kind of inception, drivers, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's been fast. I think it's been a pretty wild one. I don't think any of us when we started this company were mobile experts
Right.
or commerce experts or anything experts. Honestly, we'd been involved with some startups before, but we worked on this for a weekend and realized over the course of the weekend we ended up with tens of thousands of people signed up who were interested. We closed our seed round of funding 2 days later and kind of went heads down for a couple months to build the first version of the product. We went live in late May, early June, I guess, depending on if you count it before or after Android when that came online.
Right.
And it's been a crazy rocket ship, I think the space we're in, the payment space, broadly speaking,
Yep.
but I also think this, how you really get hyperlocal discovery right is
Right.
going to be pretty big.
Interesting. And you're doing so in a peer-to-peer sense, which is, I think, an interesting twist on it. So let's talk about, for the audience's benefit, before we go into all the things you're working on, the directions you're going, just kind of the nuts and bolts of, what Zaarly is for those unfamiliar, how it works for both the seller and the buyer perspective.
Yeah, one of the things that's awesome about this company is the simplest idea in the world, right? And it's honestly something what we found is, I don't really believe in companies that require behavior change. I think those are the hardest companies in the world to build. But what we actually are kind of trying to capture is a behavior that people have wanted to be able to do for not tens or hundreds, but thousands of years, right? It's so simple. If you're a buyer, you go to Zaarly, you say what you want, what you're willing to pay for it, and how soon you need it. It gets posted with a location and broadcast basically to the people around you. And on the other side of the market, we're like other marketplaces, except the exact opposite, right? You go to our marketplace and you look for money. Right. And you say someone's willing to pay $50 for something that I have or can do, or someone's willing to pay $1,000 for something that I have or can do. We basically just kind of tried to turn the buyer-seller model on its head, and it is so far so good.
Yeah, I like to think of it as a reverse Craigslist. I don't know if that's a fair way to look at it.
It's a pretty fair way to look at it.
And that's actually the next point is you've kind of put the buyer at the center, right? I mean, and I guess the interaction starts with the buyer, something that they put out there. So who do you say are your constituents? Is it the buyer and the seller on equal footing, or is it you're just kind of serving two masters? But or maybe
I think that we've learned a lot about that. Yeah, they are. Their needs are very aligned, right? And so on the one hand, our marketplace, when driven by buyers, ends up working out pretty well as long as we can give it a minute, because you go there for money, right? That turns out to be one of these things that is a great attractor, right? The only thing you can't, the only thing contested is if you had a market where you could go for sex. Right. And I think that
Craigslist has got that covered.
Yeah, they do, and we're not in that space. So so I think that works out pretty well for us. I think it's something we've learned a lot, though, that how we start to kind of manage this chicken and the egg, bringing both sides of the market online at the same time. And I think we've been pretty pleasantly surprised by what's possible today that would not have been possible even a few years ago.
Yeah.
Because the big fear is if we needed 100,000 people in a city for this to work, that's a really heavy lift. We start to get a really liquid market with about 300 people in a city.
Really?
And that's it's not that hard to get 300 people.
No,
right?
absolutely.
And part of it is because of integration with social and the role that Facebook and Twitter play. And if you really want something and you share it with your friends, what we basically do in that world is we make the whole idea of 6 degrees of separation happen instantaneously. So somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who's selling a couch right now, you don't know how to find them, we make that just super easy.
Interesting. So have you done any marketing or any kind of user acquisition, or has it been mostly just viral in the ways
Yeah,
you just
people
described?
just talk a lot about it. I mean, we've been pretty active in the social sphere, and that's been helpful.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's like a 24-year-old guy who thinks about like where we want to be on Twitter. I think we've done some kind of unique things there. I think we've got 1,500 Twitter and 1,500 Facebook accounts, because for every city, every university, we've got accounts that are custom to those areas, and that's actually been a really, really powerful tool for us.
Now, so you mentioned that it starts with the buyer, and then you're working on kind of having the buyer and the seller sides of the equation be at equilibrium. Is there an imbalance there? Do you find that there's too much of one side, and that would represent the areas where you would put more kind of efforts into acquisition of either buyers or sellers to kind of, or does that naturally happen?
So it depends on vertical, first of all, and we're like a very meta marketplace, so you can ask for anything, and it's actually one of the really fun things about Zaarly is there's like the bread and butter stuff, right? Which is actually geographically different. Like in the Midwest right now, everyone is asking for firewood to be delivered to their house, right? Like it's not happening in like a lot of other places. Apple products are hot. Services and product balances are different in different cities. But I think what we found in general is that what happens is the supplier makeup looks different. So we have like tons of small businesses providing services on Zaarly and tons of individuals. And one of the cool things about that is like an individual in their garage can compete kind of on like on par with like a small or large business in their area based on whether or not they're the best person. And so the right balance for us is actually like lots of suppliers, but that means more than just individuals or businesses approaching one buyer. Because if you have 5 or 6 choices, like that's just a much better it's a much better feeling as a buyer, and it creates a really happy marketplace.
Now, are you finding that, or is the vision that there are certain people out there that can basically make a lot of money from constantly monitoring Zaarly and just kind of provide odd jobs for kind of the many things coming in on an ongoing basis, or at least get some cash on the side by using Zaarly as kind of a way to, especially in maybe rural areas where you have, maybe more service-based requests. Or, I don't know if that's a fair statement, but
no, it's a pretty surprisingly fair statement. It's actually one of the reasons why we found like the even with many thousands of people like in a city, and the city can be like defined like pretty large from a 10-mile radius or something like that. The balance between buyers and fulfillers as it's getting going, what we find is the first fulfillers, sellers, people who make money on this platform, there's handfuls of them for every hundreds of people on the buyer side, and they're just straight hustlers. I mean, there's a guy in Kansas City who's made like close to $10,000 on Zaarly like in a 60-day period, and he started to hire people to work for him so that he can go and kind of run dispatch and allocate them on jobs. And it very much is, he's just super handy, right? Like he sold his grandfather's ping pong table, and he's good at doing plumbing stuff, and he'll those people are actually really, really powerful for helping our market get kickstarted, and then it becomes much flatter as it actually starts to grow a bit.
Interesting. So I stole this infograph, and I'm not sure how long ago this was out, and it might be, since you're growing so quickly, some of at least the numbers may not be up to date, but I think it gives a good snapshot of some of the things you were talking about geographically, some of the biggest categories. You mentioned Apple, services. Anything to add to this? Or what I'll also ask you is that, it lists some of the more wacky things you'll find on Zaarly. What are the things that have surprised you, either categories or just every once in a while, something that's just like out there?
The things that surprised me, I think, so there's some places where this is just like really intuitive and it works amazingly well out of the gate, and it's areas like furniture, right? Like used furniture is a pain in the ass if you're not dealing with it locally. The more local you are, like we see neighbors end up doing deals with each other that had never met each other before because they kind of come together like around a transaction. They're like, oh, we live in the same building. I think the things that have surprised me is how often people use this for non-physical goods or services that really require like they're looking for creativity, I guess. Like people seeking creativity on this platform has been what's really surprising. Like I need an amazing agenda for New Year's Eve for my girlfriend and I. Like whoever responds with the best answer, like I'll give it to. Like that's been surprising to me. And people use it a lot for gifting, actually, which is weird. We didn't like they use it not in their local area to gift something to someone in another local area. So we've got a bunch of college campus programs running now, and we see like freshmen giving gifts to their girlfriend who went to another university who's on the other side of the country, like through Zaarly.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And it's a pretty cool way. Like you could only do that if it's hyper local, but letting them kind of do that in another city it just totally was not expecting it at all.
And another interesting variable beyond location and proximity is time. I think that's an interesting thing, that a concept that you've kind of come up with here that is, somewhat, psychological, and it brings in economics in terms of just like the time value of money. And you have things that are a certain value, but the fact that it's something that facilitates things in some cases that I need it now, or, that I think has brought up some interesting kind of economics. Or what do you have to say about that?
I would say we figured this out like instantaneously, not expecting it, like when we started this company. So we went live for 24 hours at South by Southwest this year. Yeah. And in that 24 hours at 11 o'clock at night, somebody posted to Zaarly, and it was like a terrible version of our product, like at the time. I mean, we had built it in 10 days. Yeah. And he posted that he'll pay $100 for somebody to bring a cheeseburger from a certain cheeseburger from a certain restaurant to his hotel room, right? Mm-hmm. And so we called this guy later and like, dude, $100, like what is going on? And it turned out like he saw it on the Food Network. He had a 6 a.m. flight the next day. He wasn't going to get out of his hotel room, and he saw on the Food Network that it was like the best cheeseburger in the state of Texas, right?
It was worth $100.
Yeah, but it was an urgency-driven thing. Like since then, we see this all the time. We see it a lot like in the ticket world, like tickets to like small venue concerts, for example. Sure. What we see happening is like 2 days before, people will start to post like $80 for a ticket. Yep. The day before, they're all of a sudden offering $130, and then like 3 hours before, they're offering $250 because their friend has a ticket and they want to go with them. Yeah. And so it is a funny psychological thing on the one hand. On the other hand, it's very practical, right? Sure. Like capturing that value of urgency is something that's almost impossible to do if it's not very hyper local, very close to real time. Yep. I think there's actually there's a lot of magic to be discovered in that space, because people are always willing to pay for convenience and urgency.
Sure, and one of the kind of forward-looking features I've been kind of using it and looking at it, I'm thinking that for buyers, does it make sense to optimize that time scale, and as that relates to the value in terms of something automated where you can say, awesome. If this doesn't catch in the next 2 hours, the price will go down, and automatically kind of yield optimization based on that time factor.
I think in general, price optimization recommendations is like going to be a really interesting territory for us. I think the PayPal conversation is a really interesting one, because that data they have is a very, very powerful tool for understanding. First, like one of our biggest, challenges right now is people don't know what price to assign to lots of things, right? And so how you handle the I'm willing to pay up to this price, making it transparent or opaque, adjusting the price based on time and urgency. Sure. Like there is amazing work to do, like on an analytics front there that actually has really direct implications for our product.
It almost reminds me of a reverse auction type of thing, but different. But I mean, in terms of a price kind of going down until a certain reserve price, or until it gets gets redeemed. What were we going for here? I think we already kind of talked about this, the seller side of the equation. Some people are doing interesting things with it. But I think one point we didn't talk about is, I think, notifications in iOS, iOS 5 have been great. I mean, this is a screenshot I took the other day. Notifications have been better in Android for some time. But I think that, that allows for better serendipity of the product just kind of being pushed to you. And I think Zaarly is particularly relevant to this type of thing, because there are constant listings and things that you can kind of monitor in a notification standpoint, rather than kind of going to it. It comes to you.
Yeah, so we have two kinds of notifications, and they have really been hugely useful for us in different ways. One is like kind of based on where you are. Sure. So people are running around town. We have like lots of people in New York, San Francisco, who just have alerts based on where they are. Yeah. And it's like the dynamics, like the economics of doing a job or doing something for someone else is actually different if they're next door to you than they're from the other side of town, right? Like, am I willing to go and like grab a Starbucks for you? Like if I'm in the Starbucks anyway and I'm going to the building you're in, sure.
And that locus of relevance is different in a place like New York versus a rural place.
Hugely different.
Miles become blocks.
Yep. Yeah. So that's what it looks like for us who are like using Zaarly as this kind of like passive income tool to like go around and make money. Right. It's actually different. Like, so we have, I don't know, maybe 4,000 or 5,000 small businesses on right now. I think we'll have 30 or 40,000 on like pretty soon. And for them, it's different. So they peg to a location, and it is just basically like totally free, the easiest passive selling lead gen ever, right? People come to them and say like, here's what we're willing to pay, here's what we want. And it just shows up on their phone, like while they're sitting in their office, and they start to dispatch people. And that's ended up up being like a really, really powerful tool for us to make sure that people have great interactions on Zaarly.
Interesting. That reminds me too of, and you mentioned South by Southwest. I heard a story. You can confirm or deny that. You kind of talked with some of the rickshaw drivers around town.
Yeah.
To actually have them, when they might have been idle, just kind of doing things to pick up someone a cheeseburger.
Yeah, it was amazing, right? So those guys are the pedicabs, they call them in Austin, right? Who bike around and like give you a ride. I'd sent 2 emails the day before we turned this on, and said, hey, if you guys are interested in making extra money tomorrow, they sent it out, and like the 2 biggest cab or pedicab groups there have about, I don't know, 70% of the pedicabs.
Yep.
And we had 3 guys come by the day after this and said that the day before they made more money than they'd ever made in any one day, and it's because in between things they were just going to do stuff on Zaarly.
That's great.
Yeah, it was awesome.
So let's talk a little bit about your business model, and that ties into some of the things we talked about with Moke, which is transactions. How does the transaction happen? You're using tools like Twilio to connect buyers and sellers in terms of anonymized phone numbers. What else are you doing in the transaction front, and then how does that kind of feed into where you're going as a model?
Yeah, well, it's one of the reasons I thought it would be interesting to hang out here for a little bit, because I think the world of like mobile proximity payments is going to be very important to our business. One, on the other hand, it is. There are some big players out there, but it is like the wild, wild west in terms of startups and people doing cool things.
Absolutely.
So is it NFC? Is it not? What's it going to look like? It's a tough thing to answer. We're going to try to not have to be the ones who answer that question out of the gate. Sure. Like, I think we're really looking to partner with the best people on the payment side of things.
Sure.
So right now, like, our goal out of the gate was to make it dead easy for people to pay each other.
Yep.
It's very much what he set up here was, our belief is that like people should be able to pay however they want to pay and collect money however they want to collect money as seamlessly and instantaneously as possible.
Definitely.
And the second part of that is just as important for us as the first. Like, instantaneous is key. So right now we take a transaction fee if you pay with a credit card through our system.
Sure.
And we totally insure both sides of the transaction. In, I don't know, some many tens of thousands of transactions, we've had one person who didn't want to pay, like one. Right. Like, so, oh, wow. So I mean, part of that's like an early adopter phenomenon, but part of it is also the more local you get, like the less people want to screw each other. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just, there's not Nigerian scammers on Zaarly because you're going to see this person like when you do the transaction. Yeah. And so like a lot of that trust actually happens that way. Sure. But it's definitely not easy enough right now. Like even the pull out your card and type it in on the mobile thumb like screen thing or whatever, like that is not optimized yet for like the mobile like hyperlocal experience. And so I think we'll continue to be a transaction business for quite a while. Right. There's a million. I mean, people have asked, can we do paid ads? Can we show up on the top listing? All that kind of stuff. Right. At this point, like that is like we don't have the time or bandwidth to really tackle that. And if everybody has like an amazing experience on our platform, like it's not a hard thing to monetize. Sure.
Well, that's actually, I'll jump forward to a question I had too, which is that, and this gets to one of your wacky ones. This is a screenshot from yesterday, I think, or the day before. Retro ski clothing in San Francisco. There's someone just going on a crazy ski trip, and they're paying $60 for it.
That's awesome.
But anyway, so this made me think that in terms of monetization, in terms of plugging into other marketplaces, this looks like something that is kind of very conducive to kind of like a long tail eBay type of integration. I mean, have you thought about bringing in other marketplaces on either the buyer or the seller side?
Yeah, well, we made the list of like the top 3 people in the world who we want to be on our board, like when we were about 24 hours old, and like Meg was on the top of that list, and so we were like really fortunate to be able to go and get her involved. I think one, there's just a huge amount we can learn there, right? Like that's like the OG like peer-to-peer marketplace, and it worked out like pretty well. Yeah. I think. We don't quite know yet. Like as a platform, like this is really interesting. Like we will be like rolling out an API that there's like really simple ways to do integration, plug and play. What that's going to look like exactly, like we get approached all the time for like white label Zaarlys for like private groups, like inside of Google, they like want to buy and sell with each other, and like lots of people work there. I don't know yet how interesting that's going to be for us, but we certainly get a lot of questions about it.
Yeah, that seems like it could fragment the overall user base into these little fiefdoms.
Yeah,
but also could be from an API strategy and kind of almost like the zing of these little networks in that they're white labeled. I like that. So what about, this kind of relates to what we're talking about. How much do you curate? Do you regulate? You mentioned that people want to kind of pay you for sponsored listings, things like that. Are you in any way? I mean, it seems like right now it's the user can decide between proximity, price, and things like that. Different relevance triggers. Will you curate at any point in terms of, or algorithmically kind of rank things based on any factors that you think might optimize more successful listings to the top.
Maybe as early as next week, actually. Okay. We'll have some of that out. There's like a very clear life cycle of like a buyer on Zaarly and what it looks like. And the first time they come there and they're like, oh, you can ask for anything. Like, so what do I want, right? Answering that question is like, it's like the activation energy to like help people get started is something that we found is really important. So we've got some cool tools coming out around that, but what actually happens is in the beginning, people ask for normal stuff, right? They're like, oh, I do need someone to come to my house and do this. I do need to buy this thing. And then by third, fourth, fifth transaction, it's when they start to like really become like a very empowered user and ask for things that like we never, retro ski clothing or whatever. Like this is not an anticipated ask on Zaarly when we built this thing. And it's like very predictable what first transaction, second transaction, third transaction, how people become empowered. And so I think we'll be building a lot of things to help people get going, because once they get going, it's a shockingly addictive behavior. It's what actually comes out of this is more than just people getting what they want. That's what's awesome is that when you start to facilitate these in-person transactions, a lot of our users just think that we're like the greatest offline social networking tool in the world, and it's that people are coming together around like shared wants and needs. There's like a little army of like execs at Google who like part of their morning routine is check Zaarly and see if they can do something for someone around them. And the last thing they need to do is go make $60 on something. But they love meeting people who live within 5 blocks of them, and it's how they get to know their neighborhood. And that's like a pretty amazing thing.
It's a very interesting social angle too of how that plugs in. A related question is, how much are you actually regulating in terms of, just making sure there aren't inappropriate, that kind of thing? Like
aggressively. I think we'll be super, super aggressive on that. So no sex, no drugs, nothing that just seems creepy. Like we block those. And
it's like Craigslist, no weapons and no body parts. I think is there only 2 things.
We don't.
And probably more than that, but.
Right. And so we've got like an algorithmic filter that actually scans everything before it gets posted. Actually gets smarter all the time. One of the things it actually does is it crawls the Craigslist personals to improve the filter because there's like a bunch of weird code words and stuff. The things that are harder for us is how do we want to handle filtering around price? Like ridiculously low prices. Like we allow counteroffer on the one hand. On the other hand, people are like, "Come on, dude! Like that's it's too low for you to reasonably get this."
You don't want to undercut the market and discourage people.
So while it's easy to say like we don't do bad things, it's harder to say what really is the right way to curate from a price, urgency, time perspective. But I think as we get more and more data, like we get smarter and smarter about that, and we'll build tools to help people to help them get started easier and faster.
Nice. So I want to at least give the audience some chance to ask questions. I have a few tweet questions here. This one's from David Mim. Regarding service-based Zaarlys, how do you compare to GigWalk in terms of traffic, dollars, or number of deals?
So GigWalk, TaskRabbit, there's a handful of companies like in the service space. We've ended up with actually such a small overlap between those. Our services skew towards actually quite specialized, as opposed to there's not actually like a lot of delivery stuff and take a picture of this and send it to me. So it's the real answer is like in that zone. Like I don't know how well we compare to them because it's something like less than 4% of our posts. I mean we're a few 100,000 users. I don't know. I think 40,000 posts or something like that, like in the last like 30, 45 days or something.
And I'm not sure what GigWalk is to compare that to.
I don't know. I don't know either.
That's great, information. One other question. How do you deal with fraud and how do you get paid? I think we talked about the how do you get paid part, but how do you deal with fraud?
So fraud is one that we haven't really had to deal a lot with right now. So we use an external provider for our payment stuff, and they have to handle like a lot of like the legal fraud stuff. The only fraud one that we've seen that I thought was actually like pretty interesting so again we've had one person not get paid. It was for a $20 job, and so like we just paid that person. Right. I'm really happy to do that when it's that kind of volume. The one that we saw that was actually quite funny was. We saw someone who kept trying to pay themselves through Zaarly. And we blocked it. We could not figure out what the hell is going on. Like, why is this person trying to pay themselves for a job?
Losing money on every transaction.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it turns out that that's what you do when you have a stolen credit card. And so like you're not allowed to pay yourself on Zaarly, right? So there are things like that that like I just think we didn't necessarily like anticipate going into this, and it's one of the reasons why. like I think the dudes who are building like amazing payment companies are amazing. That is like such a huge, heavy thing to bite off in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
And we want to do like home run partnerships that make it super duper easy for people to get money and pay. And actually there's an imbalance a bit in the market right now. It's really easy to pay other people through lots of platforms. It's harder to get money.
Yeah.
Takes longer. You got to wait. It's different if it's ACH, credit card, all this kind of stuff. And I think that there's a lot of really great innovation to be done there. And like we hope to be on the front lines of just creating a great experience.
Cool. And speaking of home run partnerships, there are a lot of kind of big hitters and influencers in the local media space here. Let me know who I can put you in touch with, or you might get to talk to some of these people offline about various synergies and many of the things that you said. There are probably other questions here we don't have time for. We're about out of time. We're going to go to break. But first, please join me in thanking Bo.
Thank you.